Mexico City. 1519. Hernán Cortés stood before Tenochtitlan, a city of more than 200,000 people, larger than any city in Europe at the time. He was stunned. How could a civilization this powerful exist here, on a high plateau, above a lake, far from every trade route he knew? The answer was everywhere around him. Not gold, not silver, corn. Cortés never realized it. And that mistake, a mistake inherited by all of Europe, would kill millions of people over the next 2 centuries. This is the story of the most extraordinary plant ever created by human hands. A plant that built civilizations, crossed oceans, triggered mysterious epidemics, and today holds up the global economy. This is the history of corn. Southern Mexico, 9,000 years ago, there was no corn, not a single stalk. What existed was teosinte, a wild grass, unremarkable, with an ear no longer than 1 inch and seeds wrapped in a shell as hard as rock. And here is the most important detail. Those seeds were designed by evolution to fall on their own. When they ripened, the seeds dropped to the ground, scattered by the wind, and grew again the following season. This plant needed no one. Then humans arrived. Archaeobotanist Dolores Piperno found the earliest evidence of human interaction with teosinte in the Balsas River Valley, not in the form of a farm or garden, but in the form of flour. A fine powder of ground teosinte seeds, embedded in 9,000-year-old cooking tools. These people were not farmers, they were simply picking up seeds that had fallen, choosing the largest ones, carrying home the easiest to collect, and without realizing it, they were beginning the longest genetic experiment in human history. Geneticist John Dobley identified that the difference between teosinte and modern corn involves changes at only 5 key points in the genome. 5 small changes that altered everything. A 1-inch ear became 8 inches long. 15 seeds became more than 500. The rock-hard shell became soft enough to eat directly. And the most dramatic change of all, seeds that once fell freely now clung tightly to the cob. This was the point of no return. Domesticated corn could no longer spread its own seeds. The husk locked every kernel inside. If humans did not step in, did not peel it, did not plant it, corn would go extinct within a single season. Humans created a plant that was entirely dependent on them. And in return, they received the most efficient calorie machine their world had ever known. This was not ordinary farming. This was a biological contract between 2 species. From the Balsas Valley, corn began to move. Slowly at first, then faster. 8,000 years ago, the highlands of Ecuador. 7,600 years ago, lower Central America. 7,000 years ago, the Andean valleys of Colombia. In every region corn entered, human life changed. Groups of hunter-gatherers who had spent generations following animals and seasons suddenly had a reason to stay. Corn could be planted, corn could be stored. Corn could feed more people on less land than anything they had known before. 3,000 years ago, corn was no longer just food for the Maya and the Aztec. It was the infrastructure of civilization. The Maya calendar, one of the most precise timekeeping systems ever created before the modern era, was designed in large part to track the agricultural cycles of corn. In the sacred text Popol Vuh, humans were not made from clay or bone. Humans were made from corn. Corn was not just fuel for the body, it was theology. And long before the Inca Empire rose to power, corn was already being traded as far south as Chile, carried by merchants walking for days along mountain routes so high the air was thin. One plant, one continent, completely transformed. In 1492, Columbus landed. Corn crossed the Atlantic. Spanish sailors brought corn seeds home with excitement. This plant grew faster than wheat, produced more than rye, could survive in soil where wheat refused to grow. Within years, corn spread to Italy, southern France, Spain, and West Africa. For poor farmers living on the edge of starvation, corn felt like a miracle. But one thing was left behind: nixtamalization. The word comes from the Nahuatl language, the language of the Aztec. Nixtli means ash. Tamale means unformed corn dough, literally, corn processed with ash. The method was simple. Before corn was cooked or ground, the kernels were soaked in an alkaline solution, lime water or wood ash water, for several hours, then washed, then ground. Inside a corn kernel, niacin, vitamin B3, is chemically bound to fiber in a form called niacin. In this form, the human gut cannot absorb it. It passes through the entire digestive system and exits the body unused. The alkaline solution breaks that chemical bond. It frees the niacin, makes it available to the body. Without nixtamalization, eating corn every day is the same as eating no niacin at all. Europeans did not know this, and they did not ask. With deep cultural bias, they dismissed the cooking practices of indigenous Americans as primitive, unnecessary. They took the corn. They left the method behind. They imported the hardware and ignored the software. The consequences arrived 2 centuries later, in the most horrifying way possible. Northern Italy, the 1700s. Farmers in Lombardy began showing symptoms that no one could explain. The skin on their hands, feet, and necks hardened, darkened, and blistered. Not like an ordinary burn, like skin that was slowly turning to stone. Eating became torture. Their gums and tongues were so inflamed that swallowing even liquids felt like swallowing fire. Then their minds began to break. People who had been calm became suddenly violent. People who had been rational began speaking to shadows. Memory collapsed. Personalities changed into something their own families no longer recognized. Francesco Frappoli gave it a name in 1771, pellagra. From the Italian, pelle agra, rough skin. The disease was not only in Italy, it spread across Spain, southern France, Romania, Egypt. Wherever corn became the primary food source, pellagra followed. Theories multiplied: poisonous corn, a deadly fungus, an unknown infection. All of them were wrong. The answer had existed for thousands of years, in every Maya and Aztec kitchen, still practicing nixtamalization. They had never experienced pellagra, not a single case. The United States. Early 1900s, more than 3 million cases of pellagra, more than 100,000 deaths. In South Carolina alone, in 1915, 1,306 people died in just 10 months. The scientific community was still debating which germ was responsible. Joseph Goldberger, a government doctor, arrived in the region with one mission: find the cause. The first thing he noticed made no sense. At orphanages, the children were sick. The doctors and nurses caring for them every day were not. If this were contagious, that was impossible. Goldberger studied the one variable everyone else had ignored: food. Patients were eating corn and molasses. Staff were eating meat, milk, and eggs. The answer was right there, clear. And no one wanted to hear it, because admitting that pellagra was caused by nutritional deficiency meant admitting something far more uncomfortable: that millions of American citizens were quietly starving in a country that called itself the most prosperous nation on earth. Goldberger did not argue. He proved it. He collected samples from pellagra patients, shed skin, mucus, blood, urine, and even feces, and swallowed them. Together with his wife, together with his colleagues, they called these sessions the filth parties. Not one of them fell sick. Pellagra was not contagious. Then at the Rankin Farm prison, 12 inmates were placed on a strict corn-based diet. Almost no protein at all. 6 months later, 6 of those 12 developed pellagra symptoms, one by one. The evidence was airtight. Pellagra was a nutritional deficiency disease. Goldberger died in 1929, 8 years before his theory was definitively proven, without ever receiving the full recognition he deserved. In 1937, biochemist Konrad Elviem proved that niacin was the missing piece. 2 centuries of mystery. Solved. The solution was almost embarrassingly simple. Add niacin to corn flour, or return to nixtamalization. Knowledge that had existed for 9,000 years, dismissed as primitive, now proven to save more lives than every modern medical theory that had been tried before it. There was one question even Goldberger could not fully answer. Why were millions of people in the American South unable to eat anything other than cheap corn? The answer was not in their bodies. It was in the economic system they were trapped inside. Most farmers in the early 20th century American South were sharecroppers, working land that belonged to a landlord, using seeds that were not theirs, tools that were not theirs. At every harvest, they handed over most of what they had grown. And what crop did they have to plant? That was not their decision. The answer was always the same: cotton. Cotton was the most profitable commodity on the global market. Cotton cannot be eaten. The more land planted with cotton, the less land there was for food. One option remained: cheap corn, filling to the stomach. But without nixtamalization, without a varied diet, corn was quietly destroying their bodies from the inside. Stomachs felt full, but cells were starving at a level that could not be seen or felt until it was already too late. Then something unexpected happened. The boll weevil, a crop pest, devastated cotton harvests across the entire region. The system collapsed. Farmers had no choice but to grow food again: vegetables, legumes, real protein. And almost immediately, pellagra rates fell. No medicine, no vaccine, no medical intervention of any kind. Pellagra was not just a disease. It was the price paid by a system that stripped millions of people of every choice they had and called it progress. While pellagra swept through Europe and America, on the other side of the world, corn was doing something far larger. It was rewriting the demographics of the planet. In Africa, corn arrived through Portuguese trade routes in the 16th century. Far more productive than local millet and sorghum, it triggered population explosions deep in the African interior. There is a dark side that cannot be ignored. The population surplus made possible by corn, tragically, also supplied the human demand for the transatlantic slave trade. Corn, without intending anything at all, became the biological fuel powering one of the greatest crimes in human history. In China, corn arrived through Silk Road routes during the Ming Dynasty, and there, it did something that rice could not. Rice needs wet land and irrigation. Corn grows almost anywhere, including on dry highlands that had been uninhabitable for thousands of years because no food crop could survive there. Chinese farmers migrated to hills that had been empty for generations. They cleared land on steep slopes. They built villages at altitudes where only wind had lived before. Within less than 2 centuries, China's population leaped from 140 million to more than 300 million. Not because of medical advances, not because of industrial revolution, because corn opened territories that could not feed anyone before. In Southeast Asia, the same pattern repeated. Through the Manila Galleon trade route, corn crossed the Pacific to the Philippines, then spread rapidly to Indonesia and Thailand. It allowed human populations to inhabit mountain slopes and interior regions that had previously been considered impossible to settle. In 3 centuries after 1492, corn rewrote the demographics of 3 continents. Today, corn is no longer just food, it is an industry. Corn dominates 30% of global farmland. More than 60% of what is produced goes to feed livestock. The beef, chicken, and pork on our plates are largely made of corn. High fructose corn syrup is inside almost every processed food and drink we consume, often without us knowing. Ethanol from corn fills the fuel tanks of millions of cars. Biodegradable plastic is made from cornstarch. One plant, hundreds of products. Trillions of dollars in the global economy. But this transformation carries a familiar risk. Almost all commercially grown corn today is a monoculture, a single variety planted across vast stretches of land. One perfectly adapted disease and the entire system can collapse. This is not speculation. In 1970, a fungal outbreak called southern corn leaf blight destroyed 15% of the entire United States corn harvest in a single season. 15%. One season. One disease. And in refugee camps across East Africa and Southeast Asia, pellagra still appears today, in communities dependent on donated corn, with no access to dietary variety or knowledge of nixtamalization. The same cycle, the same mistake, still repeating. 9,000 years ago, someone in southern Mexico picked a teosinte seed up from the ground. They had no idea that this act, repeated thousands of times by thousands of generations, would produce a plant that changed the face of this planet. Corn is proof that humans can perform biological engineering without laboratories, without modern science, and produce results that even our best technology today struggles to replicate. But corn is also a mirror that reflects our weaknesses. We took its technology without understanding the knowledge behind it, and millions of people paid with their lives. We built an economic system that forced people to depend on a single plant and called it efficiency. We created an industrial monoculture that feeds 8 billion people, and look away from how fragile it really is. Corn is not guilty of any of this. What is guilty is the way we have chosen to use it. That lesson has been available to us for 9,000 years. In the kitchens of ancient Mexico, knowledge can never be separated from the technology it belongs to. Take one without the other, and you are not moving forward. You are walking toward disaster with very efficient steps.